is Irish Books, for intelligent discussions of contemporary Irish writing. Lovers on the run in the Wild West are the focus of Kevin Barry's novel for this episode. Irish Books is hosted by Christopher Murray.
Kevin Barry's latest novel takes us to Butte, Montana in the year 1891. My guest for this episode, Maeve Long, holds the Eamon Cleary Chair in Irish Studies at the University of Otago in lovely Dunedin. Hello, Maeve.
Hi, Chris. Lovely to be here.
Can you tell us what we can expect to find when we open The Heart in Winter, please?
It's an interesting question, that, because often people respond to that kind of question with a plot summary. But
Indeed.
Even as you were asking me that question, I suddenly wondered, well, maybe the first thing you should expect really is a specific style. Like I really think kind of the thing that leaps off the page for me whenever I read Kevin Barry's work is that he is an exquisite stylist. It's not in the kind of the awesome romantic sense with a capital R, but more this kind of, I don't know, exquisite but subversive comic play. He is a beautiful stylist that gives himself the permission to spend huge amounts of emotional, intellectual energy on making and crafting sentences that, not that they don't take themselves seriously, but are aware of how the overly serious sentence falls apart.
We do focus, appropriately enough then, on a kind of poetic figure, don't we? On a writer of sorts in Tom Rourke.
Yeah, exactly. So then to bring us back to plot, we basically have the story of an Irish community, so an Irish diasporic community in Butte, Montana, mainly there to work on the copper mines. And then one figure who isn't a miner, Tom Rourke, who's kind of there as a frustrated dreamer, somebody who sees himself as a poet, somebody who is, I don't know, in the Yeatsian sense, kind of fey, existing on this border between the mundane and the supernatural, who writes letters for those who can't write them, either home or those who feel that they don't have the words to woo.
And perhaps our inciting incident lies in that. Tom Rourke, to make a bit of money, writes letters on behalf of men who can't write as a scribe to help them find wives, mail order brides. And although we don't know whether Tom wrote the particular letter, we know that one mail order bride who arrives in Butte, Montana, is to change his life.
So he meets Polly Gillespie because one of his other jobs is that he is a photographer's assistant. And so Polly Gillespie, who's been kind of lured isn't the right word, because she is a woman of agency and of strategy, and she is aware that this is a good chance for her. So she has come to Butte, Montana to marry one of the men who are managing the mines. And so the day after they've gotten married, pretty much as soon as she stepped off the train, they go to have their photograph taken. And so they take one of the awkward couple, and then they take one of her alone. And at that moment, her eyes meet Tom's, and they realize that they are both, well, in trouble, and also that everything is going to change.
Even on that first visit, he kissed her a bit. She didn't give, and she didn't pull back from it neither. Dark cloud passed over again, that kind of heavyweight feeling. But then he went away again, and she thought nothing of it really, and she wasn't that worried about it. He was just a boy with a measure more front than he deserved. She didn't think he'd come back again, but the very next day he came back. "Is the captain in?" he said. "You know that he's not," she said. And she made to block the door, and he pushed in past her, and he was squeezing at her kind of, but she pushed him right back, and they were maybe halfways playing and halfways fighting. Fighting and laughing kind of. And then he was kissing her real hard, and before she knew what in the hell was happening, she was giving some back and interest.
So soon they're in a lot of trouble, and they decide to flee.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to set fire to the boarding house and steal the money from the boarding house.
Yeah, exactly.
And steal a horse.
Yes.
And run off.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, it's a love born of flames. They know from the start that it is a love that perhaps is not going to end well. I mean, the book opens with Tom Rourke having this deep sense of foreboding, premonition, of knowledge of ice and fire to come.
That's right. They seem to be doomed. And even when they stumble across a cottage which becomes a love nest of theirs, they don't reflect on the sense that it might not be wise to stay there too long. Because what gives the story its urgency is that Polly's husband, Anthony Harrington, enlists bounty hunters who are in pursuit of the young lovers. And here is one sense in which, for me, it gets very interesting, because this makes it a very Irish story, doesn't it?
In the Diarmuid and Grania sense.
Indeed. Yeah. Can you remind us? Yeah.
Well, again, this is another story of love that shouldn't be. The two fated lovers of Irish mythology flee from Fionn McCool, who roams through the countryside. And I mean, it's like Barry's work is often quite embodied, but Irish mythology is equally embodied. There's so many places where there's kind of deep valleys that are often quite earthily said to be hollowed out because that was a site of their coupling. And there are scenes of furious lovemaking in The Heart in Winter too.
It's fascinating that you mentioned Diarmuid and Grania, because the story that I thought of was Deirdre of the Sorrows and Naoise. And she has been raised as a foundling, I think, to be the bride of the king Conor MacNassa. And instead she runs off with Naoise, and the fate of Clonishnig, which is Naoise's family, is that they are tracked down and slaughtered. So this is a recurrent storyline in Irish folklore.
Yeah.
Obviously, Diarmuid and Grania too. And Kevin Barry is relocating it to Butte, Montana in 1891. And it remains a very Irish story in other ways, doesn't it? I mean, it's everyone seems to be from the County Cork.
Which, as a Cork woman myself, makes me very happy. Cork people will always be happy to read stories about Cork. But yeah, I mean, this is the thing. Like, it's a Western, but it's a Western in which Ireland is kind of superimposed. So, I mean, it actually reminds me really strongly, and I haven't rewatched this film in probably 20 years, so I don't know how it's aged. But do you remember the film Into the West?
Is that based on the Walter Mackin novel?
Well, it's about two boys who get this horse, Tír na Nog, and so they end up kind of crossing the Irish countryside to go west. So I feel in all of these are playing on ideas like going west to die or to go into the west, but also this confusion between the west of Ireland and kind of the American Wild West. And of course, given that Barry's works are always full of kind of melancholia and kind of this, I don't know, drunken death drive, there is a sense of that going west to die is a strong part of the novel as well.
It is going west to die, because one thing that struck me on reading it is that, particularly if we look back to the 19th or 20th century, we think of the Irish going to America to find opportunity, to find this immense expanse of potential. And reading this book, America doesn't feel like that at all. And maybe it speaks to how our sense of America has sadly changed. But everything seems very closed in. Yeah. And the lovers are being pursued by bounty hunters, and the forest is near around them at all times. And there doesn't seem to be a realm of opportunity open to them as well, but the opposite. So the Irish don't seem to be having a great time in Montana, although, as we learned, there's an awful lot of them.
Yeah. So they're being paid relatively well. So I think the book, they say that they're being paid about $6 or $7 a day, which for the period was excellent. But their life expectancy is also really, really quite short. I think a lot of them were dying in their 30s. So we're then looking at a space of great opportunity, but also great loneliness. So they have all this money to spend. They don't have a lot of places to spend other than the bars or the opium dens. And they're kind of desperately trying to relocate themselves. You know, they've left Ireland. They're kind of ripped from their roots in that sense. Not all of them would have spoken English. And in a way, I kind of wish that Barry had found a way to get that sense of linguistic dislocation or variance into the novel.
Would that have been true in the 1890s, you think, that people would come from Ireland without English?
From West Cork? Yeah, I think that's possible.
Wow.
I mean, they might not have been completely without English. In fact, I did hear Kevin talk about this, and he said one of the artifacts that they resurrected, and I don't know if this is precisely from 1890, but in Butte was a list of the options that you could get at the brothels with the options Oscailga in Irish.
Marvelous. I must look it up and expand my vocabulary in the Irish language. The women in Butte are mostly prostitutes, or they have been imported as wives, as mail order brides by men writing, lonely men, as you've said, writing letters or having Tom write letters and advertising themselves, perhaps in exaggerated or disingenuous ways.
Very definitely, particularly if Tom had a hand in it.
Given the lives available to married women in Butte, in the world of this novel.
Tom is not a man to let the truth stand in the way of a good phrase.
No, true, a true poet.
But I think that's what makes him such an interesting character to me. And it's also, to me, a real hallmark of Kevin Barry's writing. This sense that on the one hand, we can think of Tom as, doing this real humanitarian social service. He's taking these people who are very lonely, who do have money to spend, and helping them present best versions of themselves to kind of enable romance, right? And then on the other hand, he is also enabling lies and deceit. And these women are coming out thinking that they're marrying one version of a person, wooed by the words rather than wooed by reality. And so that sense of moving between the ethical and the unethical, between the kind of the dream romance and the gritty deceit, is both at the core of Tom and at the core of a lot of Barry's works.
In this book, certainly Barry has a recurring interest in the way people project their personae. And another instance of that is in one of Tom's jobs, which you mentioned, is when he works in the photography studio. And there's a question of a new pose, which has become fashionable in photography, of which the photographer himself is named Lonergan Crane. And he's talking about this pose in which women stand with their backs to the cameras and look back coyly over their shoulders, which to him is suggestive of utter depravity. Anal sex specifically,
exactly.
I think.
Yes.
And there's this idea that women are advertising themselves as sexually suspect in the way that they stand before the camera. And it's a pose like that Polly assumes, isn't it? And it's one of the kind of tells perhaps to Tom that she is seducible or something like that.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know if I think of Tom as calculating in that sense. Like, I think there is a naivety to Tom. I think of the two, and she's, like I said, about 2 years older than him. She strikes me as a woman who knows herself and understands herself and understands the possibilities of the world in a far more clear-headed way than Tom. Like the dreamer Tom is a right way, because he's a dreamer because he is often kind of drunk or stoned or high, but also because he doesn't really know who he is and he hasn't decided on which version of himself is the true sense. I know, as much as any of us have a sense of like what is an authentic mode of being.
Well, it's an interesting point because he's relocated like everyone else to become a miner. And at one point, when Anthony Harrington guesses what's going on, he says, do you know how long Tom Rourke lasted down the mine? He lasted 3 hours. And so he has found all of these other jobs to take on. And as you say, these are all different versions of himself. And that photo, to come back to that, is fascinating because the bounty hunters are given that photo of Polly. And they read her. And another character who's naive, of course, is the husband, because the photo of Polly seems to be very easily legible to other people, but not to her husband himself.
Yeah, he is naive in that sense. I mean, he's also dangerous. And Barry's blending, I suppose, this sense of self-flagellating versions of religion with an inability to see clearly. Like he is deceiving himself about Polly. He's deceiving himself about himself. Like
That's right.
So he brutalizes himself to make himself a good person, but there is no sense of ethicality or morality behind that.
Literally self-flagellation, right? Like Polly sees him. Yes, he beats himself while he prays, I think.
With a rope,
And then comes to the marriage bed.
Exactly. So it is a kind of, a real sense of I don't know, religion as vicious, but also religion as kind of drawn to sex while hating itself for it.
Yeah, it's a very sexualized work as well. There's obviously this burning relationship between Tom and Polly. There's also the proximity with Harrington of sex to having just flagellated himself. There's a bounty hunter who is kind of fetishistic in his own way. He tracks a couple down, and there's a moment of suspense where you wonder what's going to happen, and he tries to have them perform for him sexually. There's a kind of niche sexuality trope in this book, as well as all the other things going on.
Yeah, the Barry, again, this is to link us back to his first novel in The City of Bohan. There's always been a sense of an interest in BDSM in Barry's works. But I often think that really what runs so strongly throughout his works is a deep fascination with desire rather than sex. And on the surface, it manifests as sex, and it manifests as sex kind of blended with quite violent acts, either violent acts done to the self or occasionally to the other. But really, I don't think that they're sexy books. And I don't mean that as a criticism. They're not books that are about giving the reader titillation or pleasure in a kind of a straightforward sexual way. Instead, they're books about violent, conflicted, confused, self-destructive drives of desire.
So I think that's worth discussing. And also the fact the book is very funny as well, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Kevin Barry is a very funny writer. He captures a version of Irishness that is quite impressive, because in a lesser writer, I think the books that Barry writes would be quite painful stereotypes. Like he manages to present a version of Irishness that's so close to Asher, Faith and Bigara, lads, let's have a drink. And yet he never, for me at least, he always manages to pull it back before it gets into that painful place. He manages to kind of, it's not even an engagement with the stereotype. It's just on the correct side of acknowledging tendencies, both in Irish literature as a separate thing to the lived reality of Irish people, but often in Irish culture, that is able to engage with the kind of the dark side of the soul at 3 a.m, that is able to engage with the liberation as well as the flights of fancy associated with drunkenness, but giving it a sense of real lives lived both historically, but also in a contemporary sense. Because a lot of the vocabulary I feel that he gives Polly and Tom is quite contemporary vocabulary.
Well, I wondered about that. Like, we get words like dude and bullshit. And I was there thinking, were they saying that in Butte, in Montana in 1891?
He said that he was quite influenced by Deadwood. And if anybody's seen the TV program in Deadwood, so it's set around this period in the as far as I understand, real place of Deadwood. That might be known to other people because Calamity Jane and Wild Bill and all that were in that area. But when they were making the TV program, apparently they originated with non-anachronistic swear words. So historically accurate expletives. And it just sounded ridiculous. And the characters that were supposed to be fearsome just sounded silly, saying, oh, dang, oh, heck. So excuse that awful American accent. So they decided to use anachronistic swear words. So they had characters saying, I don't know if I'm allowed to swear on this, but yeah, they were swearing as we would swear.
Well, I just said bullshit. Yeah. Well, I suppose that it makes sense because it has to have the emotive force or to communicate the social power of the language we would use, which has changed a lot. And that this proximity of darkness to comedy, I think, is very Irish. And yet, the premise at the level of plot doesn't lend itself to comedy. You wouldn't think it does. And yet they're constantly blundering about in foolish ways that are very funny to read about. And the turns of phrase can be hilarious as well. And Barry seems to extract this grim humor from this situation, despite this dark fate hovering over the characters.
Yeah, I don't think it's because his characters are quite able to laugh at themselves, but he is able to create that narrative plane where through, dramatic irony, for want of a better expression, we are able to laugh at the situation while also empathizing, sympathizing, and seeing ourselves in it. Like he also uses focalization, if I'm allowed technical terminology, but he uses focalization really, really well.
Can you gloss that for us, please?
Yeah, for those who might not be familiar with the term, focalization is when a narrator, who's usually a relatively omniscient narrator, so is not embedded in the plot, who is telling us the story from a kind of a God's eye view, uses the vocabulary or uses the direct perspective of a character.
Yeah.
And so we see that in both the Tom sections and the Polly sections. And it's interesting, first of all, that I do think the narrative voice is slightly different in both. But it also focalizes really directly by moving between a description of a scene that you know is being viewed from above, and then suddenly using exactly the vocabulary that you know Tom would use about himself or that Polly would be using. And that movement's brilliant.
And just to clarify, that is one of the movements the book makes, that although we have this removed narrator, omniscient, to use the highfalutin term, it does vary its focus on Tom and Polly and different characters like the lead bounty hunter, Jago Marak, at different points.
Yeah, Barry uses that really adroitly, which also I think ties him into a great early 20th century tradition. There's some brilliant modernist writers who use focalization fabulously.
Who do you remind you of? Can you see any particular literary influences from Ireland with their fingerprints on this book?
People often talk about elements of Beckett, but I don't know if that's quite right.
I think in the loose way, we might use the word Beckettian to describe what I just referred to as the kind of blundering shambles of Tom and Polly's trajectory through this book.
I suppose it's if you married, this is such a stereotypical trinity, but if you married Beckett and Joyce and Flann O'Brien, maybe you get Barry.
Well, those are not bad places to start courting influence, are they? And of course, the retrieval of folklore. I'm thinking of Flann O'Brien, of course.
Absolutely.
The very immediate retrieval of folklore is such a point of comparison with this book as well.
But not only in terms of the folklore, and obviously we see that throughout At Swim Two Birds, Flann O'Brien's first novel. But At Swim Two Birds has cowboys in it. So Flann O'Brien takes cowboys and cattle rustling and relocates them to Dublin, whereas Barry basically takes Cork or sections of Cork, picks them up and throws them out into Butte, Montana. But there is this long history, I suppose, of interest in the cowboy and how Ireland figures into the history of the cowboy, either by putting Ireland in America or relocating sections of America back into Ireland.
Is there more to say about the fact that so many of the characters are not just from Ireland, but they're from Cork specifically?
Oh, interesting.
And this is very precisely defined, where at one point Tom Rourke can distinguish another character's accent as from a very particular region of Cork. And these distances, to someone from outside Ireland, these distances must seem tiny.
Accents had a real localized purchase on people. But accents are still, I think, a hugely important part of being Irish and very important to Irish people. Hence, sometimes the suspicion, if you have lost your accent, as to whether or not it was done deliberately, or the joy that I think a lot of Irish people feel when people who have moved to Ireland kind of are audibly taking on aspects of Irish accents.
In this novel, it's important then, as among the things that can be known about another character, for instance, who is he and where does he come from? When people are investigating Tom's disappearance with Polly and they piece together the few facts they can about his origins in Cork.
Yeah. And they know that he's not going to go back because his parents are dead. They talk about kind of, his father's background, his mother's background, but that they know that he will stay in America because there is nothing for him to return to in Ireland.
In comparison with the cast from the County Cork then in the novel, Polly's origins are very mysterious. She has been given, or she has assumed, the surname Gillespie. And in other ways, she's dissimilar to, or a counterpart for, Tom, isn't she?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways actually where they're balancing each other nicely. So I mean, we've just spoken about how very specific the Irish origins are in this story. So people can tell accents to a very small locale. Cork has been relocated. So against that specificity of accents and background is Polly, who's kind of unmoored. She knows herself well, but that self-knowledge is predicated on a lack of clear genealogy.
Just to point out that she's willing to move across the country on a kind of whim, isn't she? And she thinks this gig might be okay for a while.
I'm not sure it's a whim. I get the impression that
She's on the run.
something has gone wrong where she was, and the implication is that she was a sex worker there, so she has made a quite conscious decision to leave, to take up this offer, even though there's no implication that Tom wrote Anthony Harrington's letter. There's the sense that he didn't write an honest letter either, but then she did not present herself honestly either. So she goes to quite extraordinary lengths to give the impression that she's a virgin. And so she kind of gets some little kind of packets of blood and kind of inserts them. So when they have sex, there's blood everywhere. And that also is a kind of a comedic, there's a comedic awfulness to that.
Yes,
because it's such an explosion of blood. But so in a way, if Tom is the person writing so many letters to bring women to Butte, Polly then represents a lot of the women who come, but not coming. She doesn't come as an innocent person who's been duped. She comes as somebody full of agency, full of strategy, and full of a kind of a clear-sighted sense of this being a useful retreat, because she has to get out of where she was.
She has a lot of capability and agency, doesn't she?
Yeah.
Like Barry wants to write a kind of a modern figure. Is that fair?
Yeah, actually, interestingly, I don't know if I'd say modern, simply because I think that there were a lot of women during that period who did versions of what Polly Gillespie does. So a lot of women.
I mean, redressing the way, say, movies or novels might have had a passive heroine or something like that, or even the some of the Irish folklore we were talking about, that unlike, say, Deirdre of the Sorrows, Polly would start an argument in a phone box.
Yeah, I mean, I think she probably can keep a good control on herself when she needs to, and she did seem to dupe Harrington relatively successfully. Who knows for how long? But she comes knowing that it is a strategic move for her. So really the thing that she gives into, knowing that it is foolish, is the relationship with Tom. She kind of puts that sense to one side, because they both realize that this is the kind of the love to end all loves. There is no option for them, really, because the love that they have has taken control of them so much. And this is why this book is not romantic in the lowercase sense. It is a book of drive and desire and inevitability.
It's also a fairly brutal world is in this book. Is that fair? Do you think that of course we center on this pair of characters that they find passion together, and it's very intense, but there is a great amount of violence and exploitation and hardship and misery.
So in that sense, it's very much like Barry's first novel. So The City of Bahan also is a bleak, slightly more dystopian version of Ireland, I suppose, set in a non-specific future. And that marries desire and violence very, very solidly, as does this. Sometimes I find my interest in books at the level of the sentence means that can take over, I suppose, from plot. And so I don't read this and feel overwhelmed by the violence, even though it is a deeply violent book, because the humor and the control, I suppose, of Barry's sentences tends to give some solace, I suppose. But also, I'm not sure I completely agree with you in terms of the kindness, in that when we're moving in a Flann O'Brien way, the characters in It Swim Two Birds also have this movement as they're going to kind of a particular hotel. I won't go on too much about O'Brien's plots. But the characters, Polly and Tom, so as they're moving through the countryside, trying to get to San Francisco, they meet quite a lot of people on their kind of mythic journey. And most of them are actually quite kind to them. You know, they do mushrooms with some people. They get married by a random minister that they meet. There's a Chinese man who's a bellhop.
The minister has just slaughtered his friend, hasn't he? Because he thinks he is suffering from some kind of demonic parasite. That when they do mushrooms, that's a fascinating scene, because we actually expect that the lovers might be exploited at that point or tricked, instead of which they are given hospitality and hallucinogenic drugs.
It reminds me very strongly of the random friendships that you can strike up at 3 a.m. Like there is something very much like both a grand mythic journey in the Diarmid and Grania way, as well as the movement of people across the West of America, which itself, of course, comes with its own deep-seated problems of violence and exploitation. But there's also the much lower key daily note of their journey also feeling like the ramblings of a night out, because they don't really know how to ride a horse. They don't know how to navigate. They barely know how to shoot a gun. And so this then kind of becomes a version, if we're bringing it back to Joyce, of rambling through Dublin, a perambulation as you pick up random encounters and fun hallucinogens on the way. Are you going to leave it there, Chris, to make it sound like I have like that night out every night?
I'll leave it to the listener's imagination. I feel like, in one sense, I feel like I've been asking all the wrong questions. I want to maybe go back to the question of style, because I've kept asking you about the plot when you've said that's not the important thing about this book. And one word that, like atmosphere, is so important here, and the sentences are so immersive in Tom's psychology, even though the book is not narrated by him. And a word that recurs is ballad. Kevin Barry uses that word, and when the bounty hunters set off after the lovers in flight, Barry writes, there was an air of dark balladry about them as they went. Now, it does end in an intriguing way, which I'm not going to spoil. But as for the kind of main movement of what happens, it's not terribly surprising and maybe bears out Tom's sense of fate. But that's not really why we're here. To return to that word ballad again, that I feel like what matters to us is mood and atmosphere and the intensity of the passion between the characters and what is happening at the level of the sentence as well.
But isn't that why ballad is quite right? Like you're quite right in picking up on the notion of a ballad, because most ballads tell very tragic stories, and most ballads are beautiful to sing, and we want to sing and come back to over and over again because they strike the right balance between terrible content and beautiful expression, beautiful words, beautiful sound. And so that's what we see in this too, that tension between, the knowledge that this is not going to end well, the knowledge that this is a tragic, ill-fated romance, but then the beauty is not the right word, like the difficult beauty then, I don't know, the humorous, tragic, comic beauty of the telling.
We know what's going to happen in a ballad, but we want to hear it anyway, and we want to hear it again anyway. Maybe Barry wants to deviate from this idea of a plot full of twists and turns with this powerful evocation of mood.
I mean, in as much as the ballad is, again, like grand and mythic, but also quotidian, it's the kind of it's the fiddle rather than the violin. It's the everyday tragedy that we can sing in the pub rather than kind of anything that has to be high and remote. This is the tragedy of the lived. And that's why the story is also this kind of grand mythic journey, but also this quotidian rambling, confused, drunken rambling through a forest that mirrors a night out and the friends that you pick up and the violence you can counter along the way.
Hopefully not.
Yeah. Yes.
Proceeding then from this tradition that the ballad isn't a genre that surprises us in what happens, can we say a little bit more about mood? Can you pinpoint what are the feelings that dominate this book?
Yeah, this is a book about melancholic desire. That's it. So not so much sex and not even romance as such, because they are too fused together and too drawn together for this to be about romance. This is about a deep sense of souls colliding and a desire that goes beyond what is ethical or right or just.
Can I really pin you down and ask if you mean melancholia in a way like that Freud reads Goethe's Werther, that Tom is this incomplete figure and that he makes a narcissistic choice of love object and that he needs someone else to complete him, and that Polly, but then that's completely deviating, isn't it? It's completely moving away from an emotional reading of the ballad to talk about something else entirely.
Well, I have written on Kevin, and I wrote on his first novel, The City of Bohan. And when I was reading that, I did think of it very much in terms of melancholia and a death drive, kind of desire in terms of a death drive. And I was thinking mainly in terms of the contrast between mourning and melancholia. So if mourning is a necessary process of grieving, which by its nature has to come to an end, and that there has to be a point in which your grieving is done. You're not negating or forgetting the person, but you are now able to move on with your life. Yeah. Against mourning, which should by its nature have a successful end, melancholia is unsuccessful mourning. It's mourning that can never come to an end, and so continues on and on, either because there is no way to firmly move beyond the object, or because you kind of never had the object that you're grieving in the first place. And by not having it, you can't successfully move on from it. And that made sense in Bohan because there was a lot of love that was unrequited or never managed to actually come to fruition. There's a lot of queer elements in Bohan. So I don't think there's that, because this is a book where desire, even though it's the dominant theme, is realized. Like that there's a lot of sex. They kind of are absolutely given this they're given this month together.
There's a lot of sex, but there isn't kind of possession. There isn't security. There is a near certainty in the sense of impending doom that the love object will be lost.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of sex in the novel, but there's no sense that there ever can be a sense of being sated from it. And I don't think and I'm not saying that that's because they're having bad sex or unsatisfying sex, but just such is their compulsion around each other that the sex is just kind of propelling them to the next movement, I suppose, movement in the ballad, so to speak.
I read it in relation to the self-awareness where we know we're in a ballad, we know we're doomed, we better keep at it now while we have the chance.
It's melancholic because they know the end will come, and they can tell themselves about their lives together in San Francisco, that they both know that they don't know who will die, both of them, one of them, whatever, but there is a very clear sense that this is never going to be realized. So all of their joy and their love for one another is mediated and mitigated by the knowledge of the mourning to come, and therefore is melancholic.
So there's a lot of richness in the novel, and I feel like every time I've asked you about one aspect of it, I've ended up steering us to a point at which we misrepresented, because there's a deceptive amount going on. And it really is an enjoyable book to read, isn't it?
Oh, it's a brilliant book to read. Like it's an incredibly lyrical book to read. There's always a deep pleasure in reading Barry's works. And if any of the listeners have never had a chance to listen to Barry read his own work, Barry is a brilliant performer of his own writing. There is always a deep pleasure in the way Barry constructs sentences, regardless of what terrors he puts characters through. There is a real wry sense of humor about the misfortune that they end up in, without that wryness ever negating the misfortune or laughing at the characters.
Yeah, there's a lot of enjoyment to be found in the town of whores and chest infections. Thank you very much, Maeve.
A pleasure, Chris.
Irish Books is hosted by Christopher Murray and produced by Martin Franklin for East Coast Studio, with support from the Irish Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the Embassy of Ireland, Australia, and Monash University.